I'm the BA Commander, and this is part 1 of my masterclass. So thanks for being here, brothers, and today I'm going to talk to you about my third place finish at a recent RTT, and I'm going to basically do this masterclass over 2 weeks. Week 1, we're going to look at my list, strategies and game plan. We're going to look at game 1 against the Tyranids and game 2 against the Death Guard. And then part 2, next week, we'll get into basically the game at the final table, and we'll basically talk about like some overall scoring and what I learned, because you do learn typically more when you lose than you win, but if you can take learnings away from winning games as well, then that's really quite important too. So hopefully this will be an interesting series. You'll learn a few things. You'll see exactly how I play. I'm going to try and break down everything. We've had so many questions about different things over the last few weeks. A lot of this is going to be relevant with the new chapter approved Nephilim book, and if you do get some value out of today's video, I would love it if you consider hitting that like button. So right before we get into the list, here are the BCP final scores. You can see here that I was third. This tournament was run by my good friend Andrew, who has the Plastic Crackheads YouTube channel. You can check him out if you want. He is actually running 2 more RTTs and I think a GT later this year. So if you're local or you're in the north of Scotland, you could check it out. Big shout out to Garen, who won the tournament. I played 62 points against his 78. It was a close final game. I felt a lot better than I did over the last final top table I was at just a few months ago. And I actually finished second in this tournament in terms of battle points, but obviously third due to wins losses. So overall, I was pretty pleased. I think we can improve, and we're going to mention some ways to improve in part 2 of the masterclass, which is coming next week. So let's talk about my list. I got 1 extra relic. I got 1 hero of the chapter. We've been running this bike captain for a while. I'm not sure how he's going to work with the new less CP, because essentially he's going to cost 3 CP to run. He was a beast in that he had basically Gift of Foresight, reroll 1 hit, 1 wound, 1 save. He's a 5+ shrug. He has an Infernal Pistol and a Thunderhammer, and he also has Armor and Domitus. So he was brilliant for Angel Sacrifice. Typically, you could sacrifice him and always survive to fight another day. Mephiston is a character that I've been running for a while. I really thought that I would run the Priest in this tournament, but unfortunately I didn't get a chance to really get any practice with the Priest, so I continued to run Mephiston. And maybe with the CP changes, Mephiston might be more valuable. He is a character that doesn't really need any CP invested in him. It would be great if he had +1 to cast, but regardless. Unleash Rage is a brilliant spell. I love it so much. Guarantees a lot extra damage. It's really the only way we have to buff additional damage out of our close combat units in general. Blood Boil is just a targeted smite and wings, so he can get around the battlefield and do what he needs to do. We then have troops, and this is such a standard loadout, and I think it will continue to be a standard loadout. 1 squad Assault Ancestors, 2 squads from Cursors. Obviously, Cursors going to forward deploy and help me gain some board control. Elite-wise, it's a very jump-heavy list. We got the 5 Death Company with 4 Thunderhammers, ready for Forlorn Fury. We got the Ancient with the Rites of War, giving me 2 inches additional movement, and also +1 to hit on a core unit within 6. And the Wrath of Baal the Rites of War, giving Obsec to any core or characters within 6. Interesting, I'm going to cover how you can use this to your best advantage throughout this masterclass. Now, I ran 2 squads of Sanguinary Guard. I think swords are just in a better position right now, so I would be prioritizing swords if you have some models. Speaking of swords, I just literally bought another box. I'm making more swords. God damn it, when will I ever finish Sanguinary Guard? That's beside the point. Terminators. I run close combat Terminators with Thunderhammers and Lightning Claws. They're very durable. They are very slow, but they tend to survive, and they tend to do a good amount of damage. I've been using them behind enemy lines quite often, sometimes for Oath, but although the Terminators are very slow, they are super durable against shooting attacks. If you can get them into cover, even more so. I think for a Blood Angels player, Terminators are an okay choice. I think with the most recent changes in the drop in Sanguinary Guard points, they're probably going to make way for a 3rd squad of Sanguinary Guard in my list. We also ran some Vanguard Veterans with Lightning Claws and Thunderhammers. Typically, they've been a good unit all through 9th edition. However, into Armour of Contempt armies now, they feel decidedly weaker. You know, in turn 1 and 2 without Assault Doctrine, the Lightning Claws are just -1. The Thunderhammer's just -1. You know, that typically gives Armor of Contempt models, like other power armor stuff, a 50-50 save chance against the Lightning Claw, so they do feel quite a lot weaker in some matchups. The Landspeeder's here to really flood the opponent's deployment zone, get in there and get me more behind enemy lines points, and occasionally it can do a bit of damage with that multi-melta. The Eradicators, I feel like Eradicators are pretty good in cover. You know, they're survivable, they got a really good save, 2-up save, toughness 5, ignoring AP 1, essentially, if they're in cover. The problem is, I guess, a lot of enemies have like pretty solid firepower that is flat 3 damage, and that is sort of the ideal counter against Eradicators. So Eradicators, although I think they're good, they're definitely on my list of things that I might cut, and I'm going to talk about all the things I cut in part 2 of this masterclass. So, and then the Whirlwind Castellan Launcher, it's still there, it's still great for suppression fire. In terms of damage, the Whirlwind does very, very little damage. I think maybe, you know, if it kills one model, you should be happy with that. If it chips a wound off something, you should be happy for that. The main reason to include it is just to hold a backfield objective and suppression fire some enemies. So this list actually starts me with 9 command points and 2,000 points exactly. This is a picture of the list. Obviously, like I said, I tried to play with the priest and I swapped out Mephiston because I was more familiar with that. And then for this tournament, every game, I placed the Terminators in Teleport Strike. I placed the squad of Assault Intercessors into Strategic Reserve along with the Landspeeder. That's 5 power level plus 3. So essentially that's 8 power level. So it's going to cost me 1 CP. So really, I'm starting on 8 CP every game. And part of the reason, I guess, that I want to start on really high CP is because I know that I'm going to do strategic reserve shenanigans. I'm typically picking Nakman data, so having an OBSEC unit that can come in a board quarter, do some Nakman data 100% reliably, and then in a future turn maybe threaten or charge an objective, that's what the Assault Intercessors are there to do. And I think it's kind of quirky, but remember, Assault Intercessors are OBSEC, so you don't really need to kill anything with them. If you can just get onto that objective with 1 or 2 guys, sometimes it can flip it and sometimes it can cause big problems for the enemy in terms of primary scoring. So let's talk a little bit about my list, and I've got 2 very durable HQs in the Captain on the bike and Mephiston. They're both very mobile. The Captain gets that auto advance, giving him a 20-inch guaranteed move. Very useful if you need to get in range of something that you want to give reroll 1s or +1 to hit, like Sanguinary Guard. Also very good for joining like a combat very far away pretty quickly if you need to get in for Angel Sacrifice. Mephiston obviously has a 19-inch move if he moves 7 and then he flies, so both these characters have great mobility teamed up with, they both buff Sanguinary Guard, they both just generally survive because they're toughness 5, they both have a 2-up save, they both have a 5+ shrug. I like both of them. I don't know if we can still run the Captain on the bike with the new chapter approved Nephilim rules that are just dropped in, but I actually think Mephiston is probably going to get a lot more valuable with Nephilim because he's a character that's strong, that doesn't need any CP spent on him. I got my Sangre Ancient, and a key thing to say about the Sangre Ancient is you can daisy chain that OBSEC, so he can be hidden, you can give something within 6 daisy chained onto an objective to give it OBSEC. I got my 5 Death Company with Thunderhammers, which are going to bust up the strongest target they can of the enemies with Forlorn Fury. We're definitely going to do Forlorn Fury in pretty much every game. Sometimes even if we go second, just to get them further forward on the board. And typically 4 hammers with the bunch of buffs that I can give them. I can give them Assault Doctrine from the 2 CP Stratagem Adaptive Strategy. I can give them reroll everything from the Chapter Master. I can give them +1 to hit from the Sangre Ancient, so they're hitting on 3s. Then I can give them Exploding 6s from Mephiston with Unleash Rage. So that's 4 crazy buffs on the Death Company. They're already doing 20 Thunderhammer hits. Laws of averages say when you have +1 to hit and you reroll everything, you have an 88% hit chance. And remember, 6s are bursting, so pretty much I'm going to make all 20 hits. Maybe even if a few extra 6s come out, I'm going to get over 20 Thunderhammer hits in turn 1 on any unit that I want. Probably up to 30 inches away because I can get the 12-inch pre-game move. Then I can move 14 because I daisy chain 1 guy back to the banner. And then I can charge something with +1 to charge. So even if I roll Snake Eyes on my charge, I can still guarantee I'm going to get an enemy 29 inches away. It's pretty strong. Those 3 buffs that I mentioned could be passed out and are passed around all game, so they're still useful as the game goes on. And that's one of the reasons that I really like Mephiston as you move forward throughout the game. He doesn't need line of sight for Unleash Rage. 12 inches away, he can be hidden, he can cast it out. I also sometimes would use Unleash Rage on a squad of Incursors if there's another potential turn 1 charge that I could get off and just put a little bit more hurt on the enemy. So this list has really high mobility. It really lacks shooting, but it does have the potential to flood objectives and flood the enemy deployment. We got 14 3 or more damage weapons in the list. Then I also got the Whirlwind in there just to ensure that if I know the enemy is going to be charging me with a key unit, I'm going to make them fight last. If you're fighting last into something like Sangre Guard or these Death Company or the Vanguard Veterans, it can be enough of a deterrent to just stop a charge. Now, if you have an enemy that's going to want to charge, paying 1 CP to just make them not charge can sometimes be worth it. That can only take so much damage per phase, because this way you can pretty much guarantee you do 3 wounds to them in the opponent's turn, because obviously you'll fight them first. Most Blood Angels units will do 3 wounds to anything in the close combat phase. That way in your shooting phase and then your charge phase, you should be able to do the other 6 wounds essentially and delete whatever it is off the board. The thing that I'm thinking of obviously would be something like the Nightbringer or Gaskell Thoraka, something that's... I think there's a few other models that are coming out now that have that limit to how much damage they can take per phase. Alright, so what's the game plan behind my list? So I'm going to obscure as much as possible, which pretty much means I'm going to obscure my entire army. In turn 1, if I play well, if I play right, if I deploy correctly, they shouldn't be able to shoot anything. If I go second, I'm going to decide where I can get my Death Company to go, where again, they still can't shoot anything. I'm going to come to examples of my games and see how I did in just a minute. I'm going to use the 14-inch movement from the Wrath of Baal to threaten objectives pretty much anywhere on the map. I'm going to be obscured, I'm going to be out of cover, and then I'm going to basically be able to threaten just about anywhere. With smart placement, I'm also going to have my Sangre Guard maybe positioned 6 inches off an objective. Maybe it's like centerboard if there's a nice piece of terrain, giving me the option, if the enemy are going to move on and take that piece, then I can obviously heroically intervene 6 inches in their turn and pretty much guarantee that I'll get an extra round of combat. And sometimes that extra round of combat can be pretty huge and also can surprise some players if they're not aware. With the Whirlwind in the list and with the speed, I'm going to try and ensure that I dictate combat throughout the battlefield. Into some armies this is going to be difficult if they have various fight lasts, and we did have a game against Space Wolves on the top table and they had a bunch of fight lasts, so we're going to get into breaking that down as well. But this is my plan and this is how I was going to try and play the list. In reserve, every single game, I'm placing my Terminators into Teleport Strike and I'm paying 1 CP to put my Assault Intercessors and Land Speeder into Strategic Reserve. The Assault Intercessors potentially are going to do Nat Mandata and then try and flood the enemy deployment zone. If they can do both in the same turn, that's brilliant. The Land Speeder is going to maybe try and pop something with his multi-melt at half range, and then he's going to try and get onto an objective, back up somewhere that I need a bit of fire support, and or get into the enemy deployment zone. It's really about a fast list to put pressure on quickly. What's my weakness here? Well, I'm weak against mortal wounds. I literally have no protection against mortal wounds except on my 2 HQs, Mephiston and the Chapter Master on a bike. I knew that I was weak against mortal wounds going into this. I may be making a small change. Soul Warden is a very good warlord trait that we see a lot of Blood Angels players take. We see it on either the Sangre Ancient or the Sangre Priest, and it can provide quite a bit of value. So I was aware of that. I didn't have so much experience playing around Soul Warden, so I went with what I know, and I think sometimes when you're going to a tournament, playing what you know, even if it is maybe not the most meta list, can sometimes be the right decision. And I was pleased with the list. I was pleased that I played what I knew at this tournament. Transhuman enemies are also going to be a big problem for us. If we play against something like Orc Buggies or Tyranids that have a lot of transhuman army wide, our +1 to wound is so important. If we lose that, it reduces a lot of the strength out of our army. And then heavy firepower where the distance cannot be closed effectively. So because my list literally runs 3 Eradicators and that's kind of the fire support, I mean, I guess you could include the Land Speeder, but he really just comes on, shoots, moves and dies. That's kind of his role. If I don't have the right terrain, if I can't close the distance between big enemy targets effectively, and then I can't dictate when it's fighting, I'm going to have a tough time. So I knew this was an issue as well with the list, but I was enjoying the changes to Armor of Contempt. I was feeling like Blood Angels could do a lot better with a melee heavy list, so that's what I wanted to run. And I guess in part 2 of this masterclass, when we return to talk about the final game and some other parts, I'm going to give you my final thoughts on if I feel the heavy Blood Angels melee list is still absolutely the right call going forward into chapter approved Nephilim. Alright, with all that said, it's time to get into the actual games. If you are enjoying the video, I do always appreciate it if you leave a like. If you want to follow me on any of the social channels, you can do so on here. It's much appreciated. Alright, let's start with game 1. It was up against Tyranids, and this was a crazy game against a pretty nasty Tyranids list. So game 1 was into Tyranids, and this was Death and Zeal, and I believe this is a picture of turn 2. So I actually went first in this game, and one of the secondaries that I picked was Stranglehold, in that I knew with my incursors I'm either going to be able to sort of pressure the top left objective or the top bottom right objective, maybe using a squad of cursors to basically hide behind these. That'll maybe give me like extra easy points, and obviously then contest the middle, and that might give me Stranglehold and might give me the 3 primaries throughout the entire game without having to overcommit. Sometimes it might be worth just putting your incursors in both these objectives. The issue with that, though, is if you don't feel confident, and I did not feel confident against Tyranids. This list is very fast. Basically, his deployment zone is something like this, and over here, these two guys started just over here, so they were going to be able to pressure in here if he wanted to. His flying Hive Tyrant, that's a very easy move down into this objective. And I mean, his warriors were pretty aggressive here, and he actually had a squad of termagants that started the game behind here. Now, if we talk about my deployment, basically, my Whirlwind was behind here with 1 squad of Sangre Guards. This squad of Sangre Guards started in here. The point being that, like, so he can see none of this stuff. Then behind here, behind the train, not in the train, because the train has windows in it, so if I'm behind it, I'm obscured as this is 5 inches tall. Basically, what I'm going to have, or what I did have, was my squad of Vanguard veterans, my banner bearer, my captain on a bike, you can just see him picking out here, Mephiston as well here, and then behind all them, I had this squad of Sangre Guard. They were purposely positioned behind them, so I had a big bubble of stuff like this, right? And the reason that they're purposely positioned behind them is because I've played against armies with flyers before, and I believe in turn 1 he had a Harpy here, and his Harpy literally, so I knew the Harpy is going to fly over my units to do those mortal wound bombs. So 100% he's going to fly over something, right? If I have Sangre Guard here, in this building I had incursors and I had them deployed as far back as I possibly could, you know? Like, obviously trying to make sure that they're obscured, because I mentioned this before, like, you never want the enemy to be able to see any of your stuff as Blood Angels if you can. So I managed to basically squeeze like a squad of incursors in here, where there's no line of sight on them. My second squad of incursors, like I said, I could have put them in this bottom right hand, but I didn't. What I did was I actually put them again behind this piece of terrain here. And the reason that I put them behind this piece of terrain is I felt like if he does come in here, I mean, he's got 2, these were Carnifexes. So if the Carnifexes come around and munch my guys, which is very possible, I'd be able to advance these guys and get back on the objective and obsec it away from him. I mean, it wouldn't be ideal, but I felt like it was an idea to basically double down on this corner. This corner felt pretty safe with the Whirlwind, obviously, like it does a good bit of screening the Whirlwind itself. And then behind this building as well, I had my 3 Eradicators. With my Eradicators, I'm always looking for some windows, so that basically they can get into cover, they can basically get onto that 2+ save with Ignore EP1, which essentially gives them a 1-up save and cover, kind of. So Eradicators I feel like are a lot better if you can get them into good position. This is a decent firing arc, but remember 24 inches is probably cut off around here, so it's not brilliant, but I did think that, you know, the Carnifexes are going to be coming. Carnifexes, they'd be a decent thing that I could chip some wounds off with my Eradicators. So that was my thoughts behind that. Now, if we go back to turn 1, what I did have is I'd actually left space in the front here for my 5-man death company. And again, they were there right at the front, so they could do a Furlong Fury. And the way that this game actually happened was he had his Malceptor here, and the Malceptor does so much damage. So what I did in turn 1, I went first, fortunately, and I managed to move forward 12 inches with the Death Company Daisy Chain, so one guy was like here, cast all the 4 buffs that I mentioned onto the Death Company, then they used their 14-inch move to get around to about here, and then it was a very, very simple, I think it was maybe like a 4 or 5-inch charge, which I would have CP'd if I'd failed for sure, into the Malceptor. We actually killed the Malceptor, and I made a little bit of a misplay. Like I said, he had a squad of Termagants here, and I wanted to consolidate. Like, when I made my charge here, I think I rolled reasonably decent for the charge, so I basically piled round the back of the Malceptor, thinking that if I'm piled round the back, I knew there was a squad of Termagants here, maybe I can use my 3 inches towards the closest enemy to get some of my guys into cover, make it more difficult for him to shift them. I mean, this Exokin is going to blast Death Company to pieces, right? So if I can move into cover, maybe I can keep them alive a little bit better, maybe I can just be more of a nuisance. Sometimes if the Death Company can be a nuisance, can I kind of help you win the game because it keeps your opponent busy in their deployment zone. However, there was one Termagant right in this corner, so I couldn't actually get in here without basically becoming an engagement range. And I didn't do it. And at the time, I mean, Termagants aren't going to kill that many Death Company, but I mean, and the Death Company got wiped anyway. So I should have engaged in, because what he actually needed to do, he needed to make an advance move down here to get the Termagants onto the objective. So if he'd been in engagement and he wasn't able to, he would only be able to fall back, he would have actually lost another point on primaries, and he struggled in primaries throughout this game. I guess I played it pretty well, but anyway, I mean, it was a huge kill to kill the Malceptor in turn 1. Giving up the Death Company for that I felt was worth it. And then what I did in turn 1 is I daisy chained like 2 Vanguard vets onto this objective, so I had my 3 for Stranglehold, and I thought to myself, I'm quite happy with that, right? Obviously, like I said, at this point, the squad of Sanguinary Guard are hiding in here, and the other squad of Sanguinary Guard that have gone to the middle, they were at the back of this blob of stuff. Now, he knew he was going to fly over the stuff, and he did so, and he bombed the Vanguard Veterans, and he shot the Vanguard Veterans, and I think the Zoanthropes, forgive me if I say any of the Tyranids stuff wrong, I don't play against Tyranids all that much, they started nuking the Vanguard Veterans, so I actually picked the ones up that he could see. Once he'd killed 3 of them, he couldn't see the last 2 of them, so his plan, I guess, was to fly over them. And when he positioned this model on the ground, he could have bombed the big squad of Sanguinary Guard, but obviously he wanted to maybe try and finish off the... He wanted to try and finish off the 2 Vanguard Veterans. It would make sense to finish off the squad. And that left his Harpy actually within heroic intervention range of both the Sanguinary Guard and the Sanguinary Ancient, and they were right next to my Chapter Master, which meant all the Sanguinary Guard were hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s. So we actually had a very, very good first turn, where we killed his Harpy, and we killed the Malceptor, and we kind of set ourselves up with, like, the ability to get, like, another easy Stranglehold points. So in turn 2, as you see the battlefield now, these Sanguinary Guard have moved up. I kept them quite far back because I was honestly worried about these guys coming in. And this is my turn in turn 2. And then I jumped the other squad of Sanguinary Guard into the middle. This was I think it was the Swarm Lord, and he was one of the 2 last units. So I pretty hard committed into the Swarm Lord because I really wanted to kill him. And I did kill him in turn 2. You can see the -5 on the score sheet. I think I left 1 Tyranid Guard here in the middle, which was a little annoying, but it didn't really matter. And meanwhile, I was doing these little red tokens indicate that I was doing Nachman data in my 2 quadrants. I was also pretty ready to bring in my Assault Intercessors or my Terminators to do Nachman in another quadrant. But my game plan really here was to just hold these 3. The Eradicators did a little bit of chip damage, but they did get wiped out by the Exocrine over like a turn or 2, and his Winged Hive Tyrant was going to be an absolute nightmare. I had nothing that could really prevent it doing an absolute shitload of mortal wounds. Every time it makes a successful wound roll, I believe it does 1 mortal, and each of its attacks does about 3 damage as well. This Tyranid list, I checked it after the tournament. It went up about 250 points. Pretty close anyway. My list actually went down like 40 points. So there's almost like a 300 point difference in this list. So I had to play this super KG, and that suits me. You guys, if you watch the channel, you know that I like to play KG. So my bike captain, Mephiston, and even my banner bearer are very, very KG here. I did kind of want to daisy chain one of these Sanguinary Guard back to my banner bearer so that I would basically have the obsec in the middle. Like, I was aware of doing that, but I felt like killing the Swarmlord, based on the amount of mortal wounds he was still throwing out, even with the Malceptor dead, I was kind of scared. So I thought to myself, like, that's what I'm doing. And I think it was the right call. As we move forward in the game, then, I mean, he's going to be pushing up all his little psychic guys up here to basically, like, wreck my Sanguinary Guard, do a lot of damage. The Carnifexes were going to try and kill this squad of Sanguinary Guard. Obviously, he knew how much threat there was there. And then he had quite a few things in Deep Strike himself that he was going to bring in, like, along this side of the board to try and get in and contest this. However, I knew he just had this one squad of Termagants over here in this bottom right-hand corner. And I knew that was kind of weak. And I do have Assault Intercessors, and I do have Terminators, and a Land Speeder in reserve. So I felt to myself, like, if I can split this, which is actually going to be super easy, I can also keep my guys obscured, which is going to be great against this Exocrine, because that's, that's a model that just deletes 3-wound Marines like Terminators. So I can leave my Terminators in this building. I know it's 200 points, but I mean, if it means that I just can be a little bit more slack and still basically outscore him on primary, I don't have to overcommit. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So here we are a little bit later in the game, and you can see that I'm basically have done exactly what I said I was going to do. My Chapter Master came around here with my one remaining Thunderhammer Vanguard Vet, and the Incursors that were in here came out as well, and we mopped up those two Carnifexes pretty effectively with just the guys that were here. We also had these Incursors, like I said, advance onto the subjective. They're just going to basically be there to hold it. Again, the Whirlwind is over here. My Assault Intercessors came in and did me some Nakmund. Meanwhile, my 5 Terminators were hiding in here, doing exactly what I'd said. They'd come in from Teleport Strike, they'd charge the Termagants. I believe I did pay the 1 CP for Fury of the First, just to make sure. It was a 10-man squad of Termagants, and Terminators aren't obsec. I really wanted rid of it. So we were able to claim this back up. Middle of the board at this point is not going so well, right? Like, this Hive Tyrant is going to be in there, and he is an absolute monster. I get 3 Sanguinary Guard left, maybe 4 out of that squad, but Mephiston has jumped in. Nice little 7-inch move, and then like a 12-inch fly, and then a charge. He came over, and he started doing... He went to town on these Zonathropes, and that really cut down his mortal wound output. Mephiston was pretty useful in this game. After he kills the Zonathropes, he actually manages to consolidate into the Exocrine and then stop the Exocrine shooting as well. His Deep Strikers did come in, but I brought my Land Speeder in here as well, and obviously had my Captain and this Thunderhammer Vanguard Veteran, the lone survivor, to engage with him. At this point, I've kept my Rites of War Sanguinary Ancient, and I felt like the reason that I kept him there was just like on the end of my 4th turn or something, I'm just going to jump over here and just touch it and just make it that much more difficult for him on primaries again. And if you look at his primary scoring throughout the game, he did 8-4-4. I completely shut down his primaries, and sometimes you can win games on primaries, and I feel like I played this game very well. I also scored reasonably well on Oath because I did kill a lot. And I think as the game sort of ended, I believe Mephiston got mopped up by this Hive Tyrant. He also mopped up the Chapter Master in the middle, but we sort of held 1, 2, 3, and there was nothing really else I could score. I was desperate to get over into that last quadrant and do Nakman data. I think I had my Terminators going this way, but Terminators are slow as shit. They're never going to make it. Felt like into a very, very nasty Tyranids list. This was a very good tactic. I actually need to shout out to some of the guys like Song Dragon and co that play Tyranids a lot in Discord, because they gave me some advice on, like... I mean, I probably wouldn't have taken Stranglehold. I might have taken Relentless Assault, And I think that would have been the wrong call here because he was very, very strong in this quadrant of the board, and I really didn't have any penetration there. And there really wasn't a lot of movement or a lot of space either. You can just see the guns here. There was a squad of like Tyranid warriors that he had hung back on here. I guess he was worried about my deep strike, but honestly, I think it ended up that those Tyranid warriors were kind of wasted for him, and maybe he should have pushed them out because he really gave up map control. But sometimes, you know, holding your home field objective is important, so it can be easy to overcommit to that. And then he did fail all his deep strike charges, so maybe if one or two of them had gone off, he might have contested this a little bit more. But yeah, I was pleased with how I played. It felt very stressful when I saw the matchup at the tournament and saw his list. And killing the Malceptor in turn 1 was huge, because I think if we didn't kill that, my army didn't have enough protection against mortal wounds. So, and then Mephiston saved my life into the Zonothrope. So I think the two things that he really had that could hurt me, I dealt with really effectively. And yeah, like I said to you about, I stress it a lot, but like, he had the Exocrine is strength 9. I think it's -4/3 damage, and it's like a 36-inch range. So his firing arc is like this. Let me get all the crap off the screen. Yes, so this Exocrine's firing arc is something like this. I mean, I guess he could fire over there as well. And then down here as well. So like, this thing is an absolute marine killer. It gets 2 + d6 shots, I think. So on average, he was rolling like 6 or 7 shots. So anything you can see marine-wise, like, I'm losing a lot of them. So this is what I tell you about, like, it takes practice, but you should get to a point where, like, once you're deployed or once you're bringing things in from deep strike or whatever, you know, there should just never be a situation, you know, like, you just position your models where, like, all right, there is no line of sight here, there's no line of sight here, there's no line of sight here. And then if you do that, you know, if you play against good enough players and you fuck up enough times, which I have done, and I'm sure you guys have seen it on stream, and actually I fucked up in the next game, so I'll point that out to you. But if you do it enough times, you'll get to a point where, like, you're really not giving anything away. And I think as a Blood Angels player, especially if you go second, but I mean, even if you go first, because sometimes as a Blood Angels player, when you go first, there's not a lot of opportunities. You kind of need the opponent to move to you a little bit, or maybe, like, you know, like, I had this big block of stuff here in turn 1. So if I'd been second, that would have been fine, I suppose, right? Because, like, if I'd been second, my big block of stuff here, if I'd been second, he moves his stuff forward a bit and, like, it makes some charges. Cool. But if I'm first, let's say I don't have the Death Company, I don't have a lot of options, right? Well, I can jump my guys into no man's land? Well, I mean, why the hell would I do that when he's just going to blow them all up, right? So, like, sometimes with Blood Angels, you've got to play a little bit slower in turn 1. And as such, you really need to be smart with where you're placing your units. And I guess that will come up in all 3 games that we're going to go into. One more game today, and then one more next week. So welcome to game 2 against Death Guard, and you guys know that I play Death Guard quite a lot on my stream, and one of the things that I always talk about is how we have to try and use our speed against the Death Guard. So when I was deploying on this map, and deployment zone was somewhere like this line here, 10 inches from my side of the board, and this was the Tides of Conviction mission, which is a strange 6 deployments with some strange offsets, where if you hold the objectives in your opponent's side of the board, you're going to get points, and if you can hold their one at the very back at the end of the game, you're going to get points, and if you hold the one at the back, they're going to get no CP at the start of the battle round. So what I'm most afraid of in Death Guard lists are these damn fitted bloat drones, I think. They're not fitted bloat drones, sorry. Mythic Blight Haulers. That's what I'm most afraid of. They're all armed with multi-meltas, they've got crack missiles, they've got, I think, some sort of like Rocktail Stubber. They have 9 wounds, they're -1 damage, they have a good save, and they're -1 to hit potentially in melee, and they're not, you know, they've got -2 on their AP in melee as well. I think they're a really great unit, and in a squad of 3, they're nasty, and because they're -1 damage, it's going to bog me down. So what I really wanted to do in this game was I was hoping he would deploy them early, and I could figure out where he deployed them to get my Death Company, because the Death Company are the best tool I've got for getting rid of them. I played a game on stream not too long ago where I basically killed 2 of them in turn 1, and it lifted so much pressure off me into the Death Guard. So I thought to myself, like, that's really what I want to do, but it was literally the last unit he deployed. And this list had 3 Plague Burst Crawlers, and it had a squad of Poxies and like a 10-man Blight Lords, and then he had the 3 Death Shrouds sitting in reserve. So, and then the last thing that went down were these Mythic Blight Haulers. So I couldn't get to them. So my deployment was pretty standard. We had a squad of Incursors deploy forward. I had my Whirlwind hide behind this building. I had a squad of Incursors deploying here with the meaning of just like popping 1 or 2 of them out and grabbing this. I did consider forward deploying them here, but I thought to myself, like, it could make an easy charge for him if he went first, and he did end up going first. So it probably was the right call to just be a little bit more cagey here. I also tried to deploy as much as I could hidden. Unfortunately, because he went first, there was a small line of sight here. I mean, you can't always block every line of sight unless I was going to chuck everything into these 2 buildings. My Eradicators were deployed in this building because I had windows, and I figured these terrain pieces with this edgy bit are kind of interesting, or terrain pieces with windows. Regardless, I was going to put them out here, and I figured they would cover this, and they could cover this. And maybe once we've got some threat on this, because that's an easy one for me to get to, right? And it's in his side. So if I moved some Sanguinary Guard here, get them behind this position, very easy threat onto here. Pretty easy threat onto here as well with the 14-inch move if the Banner Bearer, who started the game back here. These 2 characters, although he could draw line of sight to them, I wasn't so worried. He had nothing that he could get to around here, and obviously they weren't the closest units either. What I did fuck up on this game, actually, was, though, I positioned my Whirlwind, and you can see it hiding in the corner, and I think I left like a tiny little overhang, so he was able to draw the tiniest little line of sight down the edge of the board here, and he managed to pop a few wounds off the Whirlwind. I was a little worried, actually, and then I just had to scoof it forward like a tiny bit after that. So that shows you that even... I was going to say even the best make mistakes. I'm definitely not the best, but this is my masterclass, so even the masters can make mistakes. You have much to learn, young Padawan. So yeah, even I can make mistakes, and he should have really never been able to get a shot on that Whirlwind. That was bad positioning from me. The rest of my positioning I was okay with limited terrain that's in my deployment zone. I figure if he's going to shoot this way, he's at least shooting. These were basically forests, so -1 to shoot over, so not super worried about that. And this Death Company, they are my last unit to place down, and I ended up just placing them back here very defensively, because I was never going to be able to get the first turn charge that I wanted with the buffs that I wanted, because I placed my character centrally, because I had no idea where he was placing his Light Haulers. So my Death Company actually used Forlorn Fury in turn 1 just to get a little bit out of my deployment zone, which was something like that. And I figured by doing that, and I believe I measured this should be 6 inches. It looks slightly more than 6 inches, but I feel like I remember this game, and I think there was 1 buff that I was missing on the Death Company, but it didn't matter because the Death Company they ended up going into a squad of Plague Marines over here, and 5 hammers into Plague Marines, or 4 hammers into Plague Marines with Chapter Master rerolls and Unleash Rage is going to be enough, right? So that was probably sloppy positioning on my part, but you know, sometimes when you're playing a few games in a row, that can happen. I was also only about my 3rd game using Death Company in the chapter banner. Typically my Banner Bearer hangs out with my Sanguinary Guard or my Vanguard Veterans. Anyway, this map, I think the terrain here helps me because I'm mobile and he's really not. I know he has a couple of Plague Burst Crawlers, well, 3 in fact, but Plague Burst Crawlers are a lot weaker into... I think they're just a lot weaker in everything. I think they went down like 20 points again. Their mortars aren't good unless they've got line of sight. Even then, they're only -1 into Marines, and if you're in cover, then essentially it's -0. So, like, you know, Sanguinary Guard are saving against the mortars on 2s if they're in cover. The mortars don't kill that much. The only thing to worry about is the entropy cannons, and only gets 2 of them. So odds say he hits with 1 or he wounds with 1, so you really only have to make 1 save. So he's maybe killing 1 model from the Plague Burst Crawlers. They're just kind of a rubbish unit now. I guess we'll see if they've gone down a bunch of points. Maybe they feel a little bit better. So he went first, and I believe he chipped off a couple of Vanguard veterans, or maybe it was Sangre Guard from this back objective, whatever he could see, basically. I don't think all the multi-metals were in range. I think maybe 2 of them were in range or something, and then a couple of crack missiles. So my thought was, I'm going to pressure here with the Death Company. I'm going to give them a few buffs, and then I'm going to hold this. This is going to get me points for the mission secondary. Because I went second, it's going to be easy for me to score Oath of Moment. I'm literally going to take 1 Incursor. I'm going to shove the other ones into cover here and like basically get them all within 6 in the middle. And then once my Death Company have killed these Plague Marines, which is pretty sure was going to happen, I'm just going to try and maybe consolidate into the cover. If I'm smart, maybe I'll come around here and consolidate into Plague Burst Crawler and make it so he loses a bunch of fire. And that's kind of how the turn went. I believe one of my squads of Sangre Guard repositioned over here. One of my others, I think my other squad of Sangre Guard were still hanging out here in my Incursors, so we're just going to pop onto this objective. And I was happy to let him come forward one more turn with these guys. I didn't want to have to try and make a long-born charge and then be exposed very deep on his side of the board. I felt like it didn't need to be. If I hold these 3, and then I've already got this one with more things that can threaten over here, I feel like I'm in good shape. And if you look at primaries again on this one, the primary was even more brutal, where it went like 46 to 10. So sometimes, I guess, again, it comes down to watching your patience as a Blood Angels player, basically holding on, taking what I feel like I need to take. And then the other thing that I was going to do is, if I have this threat into this corner up here, I'm going to try and push towards this corner with whatever I can get. Maybe like another squad of Sangre Guard could drop up here. And then if I can open up this corner of the board, I can drop in my Assault Intercessors, I can drop in my Terminators, and I can just start scoring a lot of behind enemy line points here. So if we go into turn 2, you can see the Death Company did do exactly what I said. They delete the Plague Marines. They got into combat with the Plague Burst Crawler. He had a Fetid Bloat Drone, which I knew he was going to charge with. So that was actually my target for suppression fire. So my plan was to suppress this. So if it fought, my Death Company would get the option to hit it first, which would be pretty useful for keeping those expensive Thunderhammer guys alive. He brought this 1 Plague Burst Crawler forward. I mean, I don't know if he had too much other choice. And I did, you can see here my Incursors had like squidged into the middle, so they're wholly within 6. So we can start scoring those Oath of Moment points. I think I had 1 guy outside, but after turn 1 I realized actually I can do all of them can be within 6 if we're up in the cover, so I just kept them all in cover. This squad of Sangre Guard were ready to threaten. And once again, Mephiston and my Chapter Master, they're just biding their time. They're going to react to where they are needed the most. So I don't have any other pictures of this game, but what happened was his Death Shroud came in here and actually made a successful 9-inch charge into these Van Vets. He basically obsected this away from me, and it did mess me up for 1 turn. I believe at that point I actually felt like I needed that back, because I needed command points. So this squad of Sangre Guard actually went that way. And basically, they had no other choice but to mop up the Death Shroud that were on here. After they'd done that, they were then going to come back here and be ready for basically the next turn. My squad of Sangre Guard and my Incursors kind of tied up his Blight Haulers on this side of the map. This Plague Burst Crawler was pretty free, and his Poxwalkers were just pretty free holding this. When we finally did kill the Blight Haulers, which actually Mephiston aided in by moving 7 and then flying 12 and then making a nice long charge. When we finally did clear up them, my Sangre Guard went into these Poxwalkers, and it was a suicide mission because I knew that his large squad of Blight Lords were going to come and kill them. But again, it just took him off a primary for a turn, made it very difficult, and also it pulled the Blight Lords this way, which was big based on my strategy that I wanted to free up this quadrant of the board. What I did as well on this quadrant of the board is I brought in my Terminators over here with Deep Strike, and I actually managed to make a charge. And I actually managed to fight while still being inside his deployment zone. So basically started scoring my behind enemy lines points. I believe 1 Death Company guy survived as well, and he also got in for behind enemy lines. So meanwhile, like, I've done that one data here, my Cursors had done it over here. My Vanguard Veterans were toast, but that was okay. And I basically still had my chapter master, who eventually came around here. He actually killed this Plagueburst Crawler, and because he only had 2 characters left on here, I thought maybe my chapter master could kill them both. He killed one, and then he died in return, but again, it was just to try and really shut down his points completely. At a closer game, this was actually a misplay, because I actually gave up Assassinate points by giving away my chapter master here, which was definitely the wrong call. I could have easily had him just run over here and just sit and guarantee my Oath of Moment points and screen them with the Terminators. I actually ended up doing Nakman data in this quadrant of the board with the Terminators. I know a 5-man squad doesn't always do it, but I mean, for the most part, it is pretty reliable. And then the final thing was I brought once this Plagueburst Crawler had moved out a little bit more, I brought down my squad of Assault Intercessors in here, and right in the corner, there wasn't very much room, but they did again do the final Nakman data. I did try and get them over to an objective, but it was just too far away. It was too little too late at that point. That's something that I've done in games before, where like you have to be very wary if you drop something right in the board quadrant or right on the board edge. Like if they've only got a 6-inch move, which essentially my Assault Intercessors do. So in turn 3 they're static, right? Because they've done Nakman data. So in turn 4 they can move 6. So they're here at best, maybe. And then turn 5 they can move 6, and then even then, or even if they'd gone this way, like they can if there isn't very much to charge, they're not moving onto anything, they're not threatening anything. And I guess this is why some people have talked a lot about assault squads, 6-man units being a lot cheaper now in chapter approved Nephilim. Obviously you don't have to drop them down quite so near the board edge as well, because they are like basically death from above as opposed to strategic reserves. It's definitely something to think about. I was pleased with how I played this game against Death Guard. I felt like my target priority against Death Guard is pretty good, and also I felt like our army is fast enough. If you know what you're doing against Death Guard, the only thing I think the Death Guard have that scares me a little bit is Mortarion, and I think other armies, for example, like if Death Guard run into Chaos Knights, Mortarion will get shot off the table in turn 1, for example. So Mortarion is a risky pick for Death Guard players, I think. So I don't know if we see him that often in tournament play, but I guess maybe we'll see him with the new Nephilim changes. But regardless, into a list like this, and I mean, a purposeful thing of mine is like wherever this 10-man Blightlord goes, I will go anywhere else they aren't. I don't have enough 3 damage weapons, and they are -1 damage, and they all have a 4-up in Von. Yeah, so I can't effectively remove that unit without trading really badly. So I tend to try not to. I mean, they can only really be on 1 objective, maybe 2. They're slow. And I mean, at the end of the game, I guess they had come down onto this. I'm going to use a different colour here because I've got so many scrolls. They had come down onto here and they'd killed my squad of Sanguinary Guard. And then I believe at that point, I thought he might try and pressure this one for some extra points. So this squad of Incursors actually just moved out and just made a line like this. So it was like, if you want to charge the Incursors, you kind of have to just charge them like here, I guess. And I positioned my Sanguinary Ancient like right here on the edge. So basically I knew I was going to obsec it with whatever models I had left here. And he was never going to be able to get enough models on to flip it away from me, I think. So that's kind of how Game 2 went against the Death Guard. I felt pretty happy about it overall. So I can't up apparently, and we did notice that before I submitted the scores on BCP, but I was actually at 96 points here, where I basically 14 for Engage on All Fronts, max on Retrieve Nakman Data, and max on Oath of Moment. So it was a very good scoring game. I didn't have that much left at the end of the game, and my Eradicators kind of felt a little bit wasted. Maybe I could have tried to move them more further across the board, but I'd won the battles that I needed to win. I'd taken all the primaries, I'd been doing my Relentless Assault. Sometimes that's the way it goes. You can have a unit on the board all game that does nothing and you still win the game. So my experience against Death Guard really helped. I guess there is no substitute for experience. So let me know in the comments below if there's something that you think that I could have improved that would help you understand or do better in the future. I wanted to break these down. In part 2, I'm going to be talking about my game against Space Wolves at the top table, where I performed much better than my last time at the top table, I must say, and obviously finished the tournament third. So onwards and upwards. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me a like if you did. We are going to be working on some chapter approved content very, very soon. I actually have COVID at the moment, unfortunately, but I'm sure I'll catch you guys at some point in the next week. Enjoy your weekend, brothers. Thank you ever so much for the support. Hope to catch you all soon. By the blood are we made strong. Peace.